Okay, as I have mentioned before in other podcasts, we talk a lot about energy. And why is that? Because every molecule, every electron that you are using will be coming from a rural community. So the disruption that is happening with energy is affecting all of us in rural communities. Because the minerals that are needed for battery manufacturing will come from rural communities. So we're getting affected on both ways. So with me today is Sean De Vries. He is with the battery minerals or battery manufacturing
Metals.
metals. He is with the Battery Metals Association of Canada, and they've been doing a lot of amazing work on cluster work for the different provinces across Western Canada. So if you're listening to this and you're not in Western Canada, I still think that you'll get a lot of good information for your community or for your region. So please do keep listening. So Sean, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about BMAC?
All right. So BMAC is the Battery Metals Association of Canada. We're a nonprofit industry association. We represent the entire battery value chain. What that means is everything from mineral exploration and extraction all the way through to processing those minerals into battery grade materials, building the batteries, producing whatever use they're going to go for EVs or energy storage, and then recycling those batteries at end of life for the circularity. So our focus is really on helping to build out this battery value chain. So we have all of those different pieces within Canada.
That's interesting about the recycling. I'll make a note of that and come back to that. When did you start? When did BMAC become into operations?
Well, it's interesting because we started about 5 years ago, and we started
Okay.
as the Canadian Lithium Association. So it was a little more focused, and we started by a group of lithium brine developers in the West, which is why we have a very Western heavy focus in some of our work. But they quickly realized the need to grow beyond lithium and beyond the West, and so we took on this broader battery metals scope and Canada as a whole. Because the key is, not just the lithium itself or really any of the other minerals, it's how does it fit into that battery value chain. So if you mine the material, what is it that your customer or potential customers are going to want? The grade of that material, the type of the material, that type of thing. So this is why it's so important to tie together these different segments of the value chain.
Yeah, that's a lot to go on there to talk about. Before we get even more details, because there's a lot of questions I have, what do you feel about the overall industry, where it's going, some high points, some low points, and maybe where Canada it could do better or take advantage of opportunity?
Wow, we could go on this one for a while probably, but where it's going, I mean, this is industry that's just at the nascent stage right now in Canada. It needs to go much further. But having said that, on the global scale, as we're talking about the energy transition overall, this is such a critical component of that. And so what we see happening in other regions, many are in the same position as Canada, but places like China are much further ahead. So when you look at the Chinese market, they've got the minerals, they've got mineral processing in place. They're all the way through to building out batteries and really next generation batteries. So we've got a lot of areas, as we talked about these different components of the value chain. You have to build out a lot in Canada. So what the opportunity there is that there is so much for us to do, and that's part of the work that we're looking at is what makes sense then for different parts of Canada. And we can't do everything, or everybody can't do everything. So how can we focus this and focus our energies and collaboratively look at kind of filling some of these gaps and providing some of those opportunities in Canada?
That's a really good overview. From what I understand, and any lithium or any graphite that we would produce, the final IP, the final processing, the only place you can get that done right now, from what I understand, is China. So the existing graphite mine in Quebec, all that has to go to China just to come back for here, North American producer to do something with that. Is that pretty much accurate?
That's pretty much it, right? And that's across the board for many of the minerals. So it's a lot of capacity that has to be built up, and there's really the technological innovation behind that. And what we do see behind some of these processes, um, standard processes that have been happening for years. What we want to see is we get to a lower carbon type process, we get to more competitive, and that's where the real innovation in Canada needs to happen so that we can compete with some of those external markets as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, the low carbon piece. Another thing to come back to, because it is very true. Like, if the market is wanting to electrify something, they want to ensure the whole chain behind it is being decarboned or has a low carbon footprint. So that's really good.
That's
But back
exactly
to
it.
the China thing too is what I have noticed is that Europe and North America has lagged behind uh, with battery technology, which I find interesting because if you look at the original IP, one of my heroes, John B. Goodenough, who just passed away last year at the age 99, and I think he won the Nobel Peace Prize at age 92. But if you look at what he created, he is the founding father of things like iron phosphate batteries, as well as nickel, cadmium, lithium batteries, or what have you. The batteries that we're using in EV. But now that's gone to China, and we've lagged behind, and they now have like CATL and BYD now have batteries that exceed anything that we can create. Is that pretty much accurate? What do you see with that kind of process happening?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, the technology has continued to develop and evolve. And if we're still talking about kind of that earlier technology and building that out in Canada, that's really not going to be competitive. We need to start to build the next generation of technology. And so
Good point.
we really have seen that within China. And one of the common sentiments that I hear is just that, we have rooms of engineers here working on this type of technology within Canada or North America, and they've got thousands of engineers, like BYD, for example, has thousands of engineers in their engineering space. So, those are the kinds of things that they've made such further advances that we've got a long way to go.
And that really reflects anytime I talk about innovation in North America, especially in Canada, I always just like to remind everyone, if you look at a dollar spent in applied research and product development, both public and private money, you have South Korea tied with United States in first place. Where Canada, our spend is so low in the G20. There's third world nations that actually spend more on us, and I'd hope with the current trade wars that we're in and how we're re-looking at Canada, that we start to pump up that money. And when I say that, notice I also say private, because culturally Canada, we're not as we're really risk adverse when we go to spend our money. We're in the States, and now that money's caught up from us. We have a hard time spending extra money on something that's risk. So sorry.
Well, and you just gave the advantage of China and some of the previous technologies that were developed in Canada or North America, and then they get commercialized elsewhere. That's what we
Yeah.
don't want to have happen, is losing that IP, right? So we've got to ensure that we've got this environment where we can do the research and development, we could get to commercialization of that. So there's a lot of investment in that. It's government, industry, collectively working together on that. But one of the challenges that I find is government has actually in recent years earmarked a lot of money towards this space. The
Good to
problem
know.
is a lot of it hasn't moved yet. And so when we have so much to do, we have this massive industry we're trying to build ahead of us, what do we invest in? And I think that's really the question or the struggle that government has. They want to make smart investments as well. And so we see things like, dollars going to gigafactories and things like that. And there's a lot of concern because those become big dollars. But obviously, it's an important part of the value chain as well. And if you can secure that, that's a huge customer for the rest of the industry. But what we see the real advantage is not in just those one-offs, but how do we build out the entire ecosystem? And so now you have, potential upstream suppliers and downstream customers. What are those interactions? And this gets back to, different strengths and opportunities. So ensuring that really what we're doing is smart investment, smart development, so that it is set up for success going forward.
So essentially, your cluster work, what you're doing is you're creating that whole groundwork so that when the government does invest money into something, there's a proper plan behind it. You're not just saying, hey, we're going to go build a gigafactory in Quebec or Ontario. And I mean, that's a good example because that one's now struggling. Maybe that's partly because we don't have that groundwork done, which is what you're doing. So why don't you tell us more about the cluster work you have been doing and how that's going?
Yeah, so what it is called the Western Canadian Battery Hub is the concept that we're working on. And as I mentioned, we do have a Western focus starting off in the region. And really what we've seen is Quebec has done quite a good job of some focused development in the Bécancour area. So knowing what they want to build out and targeting those investments. And Ontario has a lot happening by virtue of the automotive industry largely being in Ontario and making this change over gradually. And so there's developments happening there. And what we saw is there's this huge opportunity for the West. We have, if you just look at the critical minerals that are available, a whole host of different minerals, this wide, landscape, lots of industrial skill sets, workforce. And so how do we start to leverage what's in the West to augment what's happening in the East? And that's really the essence of it. So we started taking a look at different regions in the West, again, with the minerals at the key starting point, but then also key developments and industries that are taking place and overlaying that and saying, what are some of these areas that have some potential already that are doing some things? And, there's some real key areas you can immediately identify. And then it's about looking at what elements of the value chain would best suit those areas. So we know, for instance, the North is rich in minerals, whether that's the territories, Northern BC, Northern Alberta, et cetera. And so there's not likely going to be a lot of processing up there, though. So we want to say, well, what's the best way that we can get those minerals out and get them to processing? And those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. So that then involves not just workforce, like I just mentioned, but transport infrastructure as well, power infrastructure. So there's a lot of considerations we have to give in order to build these out. And what we did as a starting point, we looked at British Columbia and Alberta, and we found 5 potential industry clusters that we think could work. So starting off with minerals in the north that I just mentioned, and really, you talk about the copper corridor or the golden triangle in northern British Columbia, and some lithium happening in northern Alberta as well. And that material likely going into the Edmonton-Calgary corridor for processing. And that area, of course, has a lot of industrial skills already, infrastructure that's there, so we can leverage some of that. And then moving that material into the Vancouver Lower Mainland area, where there's already some battery production, there's some R&D and different things happening there on clean technology. So it's leveraging those individual areas and their strengths. Lastly, then, of course, from the Vancouver area, there's ports and opportunities to export the materials as well in the product. But then we got to talk about end of life. So what happens when we get these products back? And there's already a recycling industry set in the Kootenays area. And of course, the Tech Smelter and Trail is out there as well, where they're doing some smelting and the material production there. So that's now an area where we can look at for potentially second life of batteries. Get batteries back. Is there some testing, remanufacturing opportunities? Is it recycling then? And then that gets into the next stage of those materials going back into new products. So how do we get those materials back into new batteries? What are those new maybe chemistries that we can be looking at and things like that? So it really becomes the next step in innovation as much as it is the end of the life of the batteries themselves.
Oh, wow. You just covered so many things. That was amazing. So, so many questions, but maybe the easiest way to ask it is, where's the biggest gap? Where's the biggest need? Like, one thought that as you were talking, I was thinking about, wow, transportation. I mean, the minerals and even the batteries that are produced are heavy, and there's a lot of volume there. So yeah, what kind of gaps are you finding?
Transportation is absolutely one of them. And we're going to talk about straight from the mines, right? Because if we're looking at the territories in northern parts of the provinces, we're going to have rail lines. We're going to have new roads going up there. So that's going to be a challenge. As we're putting that in, then power as well. That's going to be another big challenge. So where are you getting the power from? How are you getting it into these clusters? Those are key. As we're talking about some remote regions, then workforce is obviously a challenge as well. So how are we now training and equipping these regions with the right workforce? So that's a little bit less probably of a challenge because that's it's a manageable thing. But when we talk about the other areas, it's the infrastructure development, but just the developments themselves of whether it's processing or the mines, they require funding. And so that's what it all kind of comes down to at the end of the day. The government can't fund all this. As you mentioned, we need private investment as well. So the hope is here, though, when we develop now this plan and we show this business case, now we take out some of that risk to show, yes,
Yeah.
there's a viable industry happening here. This is just one cluster, perhaps, but here's who their customers are going to be. Here's who their suppliers are going to be. And you start to take that risk out and hopefully start to attract capital into those areas as well.
I love that. Yeah, de-risk is the base of all these projects that we're doing. With regards to electricity, again, just to stay on the infrastructure a bit, what are you finding with electricity, both on what the market wants and then what you actually have, and between that, what's the gap?
Yeah, so one of the big things within this industry and one of the huge opportunities for Canada is that we tend to have a lot of clean electricity. So when you look at Europe, for instance, they've got requirements around batteries that you have to measure carbon and you have to report the carbon of the batteries themselves. And so they're looking to areas like Canada that can produce materials and batteries within a low carbon framework. So as much as that's an advantage, we have to ensure that these regions have access to that clean power, because some obviously still don't. So
Yeah.
that's one of the big challenges that we have, is ensuring that we can get clean, reliable power into these locations so that they can do the processing they need.
Is there any novel new technology with energy generation that you've run into? So, like for example, Saskatchewan's working on the micro reactors that could power a mine or a small community. Have you run into other things like that?
I mean, I think those are very interesting. That
Yep.
that creates a huge opportunity. The microgrid concept, I think, just solar with battery backup is really exciting as well. Whether that's enough for a mine on its own, I'm not sure at this point. So
Yep.
I think we have to test out some of these things, but there definitely are some opportunities, and we do really have a lot of clean electricity anyway. So in some cases, it's just about getting that to the right location. What that might mean, though, is breaking down provincial barriers as well. We
I
hear a
was
lot
about to
about
go
that,
there.
right?
Yeah,
And so why aren't we trading this back and forth east and west? And I know there is
100%.
some talk about that right now within platforms. So I think that would be an encouraging development as well.
Yeah, I was about to go there. Is that, Canada, we're not a nation, we're just a bunch of provinces, and we are so fragmented. But it is good to see over the last few months that because of the tariff war with the United States, so much electricity had been shipped down to the States, and now we're seeing with DOGE, they defunding the U.S. side of that grid, so that provinces such as BC have no other option to now start selling east-west, or I guess for them east. I know that, for example, in Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan itself is really struggling with bringing cheap electricity that is also clean, just based on the fact that there's no, mountains here. There's not much of an elevation drop. It's hard to do hydro. We're looking at things like small modular reactors, but we're 10, 15 years out. So it really is going to come down to those little solutions and maybe doing an east-west connection for that kind of stuff. But it sounds like when it comes to infrastructure, these infrastructure projects is probably where the public dollars need to be spent, especially with Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba having government utilities, where Alberta is a private utility. Would that be accurate? So like the roads and the access to electricity, that's where you would see the public spend?
Yeah, that's why I think this is so important to look at this in terms of clusters and what the real opportunities are. Because when you put a road in or power in, it's not just necessarily for a mine, but what are the other processes, potential processes around it? What about the communities around it? We've got northern communities, remote, indigenous communities, like they can use these services as well. So we have to look at
Good
this in
point.
the broader scope.
Yep.
And hopefully this becomes part of economic reconciliation as well, right? And we start to
Good point.
tie these together and say, we're spending dollars not just on a project, but we're spending it on communities and areas as a whole.
It's kind of like the timber or lumber industry in the 50s and 60s in BC. A lot of the roads and highways that we now have in BC is because of that industry. So
Right.
this could be a good opportunity, like just to say what you said back again, is it's a good opportunity to justify the needs for more infrastructure, which then leads to more economic development. And like you say, indigenous communities are going to be more connected, and that helps with reconciliation. That's a really, really good point. Where do you see in all of this? So it sounds like infrastructure is going to be the public spend. Where do you see the private spend?
Well, we've got to start getting shovels in the ground, buildings built, and I guess holes in the ground on the other side, getting the minerals out. So,
Yeah,
some of that is happening. It's a slow industry right now. That's why we have to build the business case for it, show that there's a real need here. The challenge has been, really with external markets and fluctuations in mineral prices and things like that. So,
right.
there's been a lot of opportunity here with, tax credits and things where we're trying to get, I think, use creative measures to try to get increased investment as well. So we still have to push on that, push on, trying to get these clusters with a little more kind of assurance in what can happen there to build the confidence and get that money flowing in.
Yeah, and you touch on something without actually saying it. I've been involved in a project here, and we needed power. And the time that it would take to get access to that power, just in the theory of everything and government authorizations, is 7 years.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that mines are in the same boat. But the problem is private markets, private industry. 7 years from now, you can't even, good luck trying to forecast that. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, we need to make regulations a lot faster if we're going to jump on there. The other thought is, like, with us, we're turning our existing coal mine into a graphite mine, so that does shorten it. So there is also an opportunity for private industry to use innovation to take existing mines and switch them around in some way. So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I think, a great example of that, we talked about circularity, kind of the new materials we're going to be producing. What about the ones that are already dug out of the ground and the tailings piles and
Good
things like
point.
that, right? Like there's a lot of material out there we can start accessing, we can start processing. That really requires that innovation though, right? It comes back to that again. There's some of these key points that really, I think, are the essence of what we need to build on to push this forward. So lots of innovation that goes back to our tech centers, the researchers that are out there. What are they doing and what can they help with to move some of these things forward?
I like what you just said there, because I was reading a study about 2 weeks ago out of the US that said that there is enough critical minerals in all of the fly ash from coal plants that they're just sitting there from the last 100 years that could supply us with enough critical minerals without needing to dig it up. Though there's a big part of that equation, which is how do you get those critical minerals out of that fly ash at an
Correct.
economically viable point. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of innovation that we can get to. Though as I say that fly ash, you're still behind a government regulation, right? Most of that fly ash is owned by utilities, crown utilities, or you got mining regulation about not wanting to disturb that fly ash. So again, you run into that challenge. Tell me more about the recycling, because I think a lot of people don't truly understand that we are already recycling these batteries, but we're also reusing these batteries too. So tell me more about all that.
Yeah, I think the first thing to really understand when we're talking about, say, EV batteries, right? Because it's hard for us to imagine what they are.
Yeah.
They're not really any different than the battery in your phone or your computer. They're just more of them.
Yeah.
And if you take kind of the AA battery out of your TV remote, you think about that, that's one cell. And all you do is tie a bunch of those together. And there can be different configurations, whether they're the hard and cylindrical type or the soft packs like in your phone, but it's the same technology. And so because of that, we've been recycling batteries for years in Canada, and we do have infrastructure for that. We've been collecting them, recycling them. So these batteries essentially can be treated the same. The question is, how do you get them there? As you mentioned, these are large. These are potentially dangerous as well, because there's some fire risk to them as well. So they've got to be transported properly. But getting them from remote regions is going to be a challenge. So there's all these challenges up front. We know we've got the technology to do it. When you basically recycle them, you shred them up. You've got to have controls in place, again, prevent fires. You
Yeah.
separate the materials. There's your plastics and your basic metals, your casings and things. And then you get this black mass material. And that's the real important stuff. It's got all the critical minerals in it. And we've got recyclers within Canada that can manage that, can separate that material out and produce new battery ready materials again. So it can be complete full circuit, right from battery back into battery. Now, the interesting point that you touched on is the reuse as well. So
Yeah.
just because a battery is quote unquote dead, it isn't really dead. It may not be useful for that product. And EVs are a great example where 70–80% of their charge are really no good for that vehicle anymore. So they would be replaced. Now, what we're finding though is batteries really are outlasting the vehicles as well. So
Yep.
the reuse stream is a lot less than I think was anticipated. I remember years ago, people thought it was going to be 5 or 7 year lifetime on batteries, and they're exceeding 15 years now. So all that to say, though,
Your sound is cut off.
Oh,
hold on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Say that again. Keep going.
Sorry. So I was going to say that I don't know where it was actually.
You were talking about how EV batteries are lasting so long.
The reuse, yeah. So batteries are lasting longer than what was expected. So when they are end of life, though, particularly out of EVs, you can take them out. Sometimes they can be remanufactured. Sometimes they can just be reused as is, because even 70% of charge, if it's just as a backup power source for something, that might be suitable. So what's actually happening is there's a reuse industry developing around taking out these batteries and putting them into battery energy storage systems. So now they can be used for a secondary purpose within a building or a home, something like that.
Yeah, and I have owned an EV for the last 5 years. It's a Kia Niro EV. When they hook it up to the computer, and when I go in for maintenance, the computer's still saying like 99 to 100%. And I can affirm that by the fact that I haven't noticed any range loss. I'm sure it's there. It's going to be there. But exactly to that point, it's 5 years old and it's still going on. So that's going to continue. I think where some of the the recycling will happen is because my car is only has like 5 or 6 moving parts, it's going to last a long time. And in that, I've already started to look, is there new technology, new battery technology that can be retrofitted into my car? And at this point, there is one that's, for $5,600, I can add, 10% more range. So I'm not going to do it. But the point is, I could start seeing people pulling out their batteries of the car and upgrading them, because the car is just lasting so much longer. So another, stream on there. Think of us as being a colonial economy. First it was with the British, and now it's with the Americans. And what I mean by that is we're really good at pulling stuff out of the ground, sticking on a train or a boat, going home, cracking a beer and watching a hockey game. And we've become so complacent that, again, this tariff war is showing us that because we rely so much on all these other countries to do something with it, that we're now, vulnerable. And I would love to see us, not just with battery minerals, but with everything, just making more stuff here. So with that in mind, like, how is it going with the processing part and the battery manufacturing, keeping that here?
Yeah, and I think, this is the real challenge of it being so easy to trade to such a large trading partner. We do our little piece and we pass that along and we think our job is done and, wash our hands of it and that's it. And so that is the challenge of what we need to face now, and looking at this in clusters and entire ecosystems and trying to build the value add pieces within Canada. So there's a lot of opportunity because it goes all the way across the value chain for us to do this. But we do have that, the specialization in many areas. So I think we're going there now. I think that, we've finally seen that, and in part, the current situation with tariffs and things like that and trade restrictions, that obviously amplifies it as well. But it just means that we have all of these developments happening right across the value chain. And so with things developing in parallel, you can't just sequence them. We're going to start the mine, then we're going to build the processing facility and so on. So it means that we might need to build a processing facility right now that imports material for a period of time until the mine is going. Because we know, as you talked about permitting processes and things like that, it can take a while to get those mines open. Likewise, the mine may need to it may not have a processing facility to go to, so it may need to extract and export some of that material, which we don't want to be doing, but it might be that interim solution. Or we got to look at things like stockpiling. There's other things we could be doing as well. How can we do that? And are there financial mechanisms in place that kind of encourage us to keep the material within Canada, to support industry and things like that. You look at things like content requirements. European Union is doing that type of thing, is requiring recycled materials in, requiring low carbon materials to be included in batteries. And so that's part of it as well, as we can look at how do we incentivize clean materials from Canada, that are locally sourced. So I think there's a lot of creative things we have to do because that development still needs to happen.
So back in the 90s, I had the opportunity to debate with Premier Van der Zalm, and it was with regards to raw log exports. And Van der Zalm was saying that we had to do it because we're so far away from the markets. So we could never do manufacturing in Canada. What do you say to that?
I think it's just a matter of if we want to or not, right? And what's really interesting in this industry now is, and you can even see it across the electronics and things like that. We've come to such a high technical level that it's not the same type of operations and kind of workers and jobs that we saw maybe in the 80s or the 90s that were all being exported for cheaper labor. What we're talking about now is really high tech stuff with robotics, with AI, and all these other pieces that allow us to be competitive in Canada, because there really is no lower worker advantage or wage advantage in those scenarios. So I think what we need to do is focus on that innovation again, look at robotics, look at AI, how do we incorporate these things and really start to build next generation things, batteries, materials, and focus in that area. And that's really what's going to help us.
I like what you just said, because one of the counterpoints I always say to people is, hey, look at South Korea. I mean, sure, now it's really close to China, which now is a large market. But if you look at the history of after the Korean War and how it built up, Hyundai was selling into North America in the 80s and the Chinese market wasn't there. And your point is so valid when you look at South Korea, because it was about innovation. It was about technology. They didn't have the minerals we had, and they created this wonderful economy. And I think that's probably why they have such a big spend on public and private dollars when it comes to applied research and product development. So there's right. What you just said taps into that whole premise, is that if South Korea could do it, we can do it too. So, and the other part I liked about what you said there is, like, what is this podcast about? What is my work at Southeast Tech Hub all about? And it's all about rural innovation. So there's an opportunity here that in this current disruption and looking for innovation, some of this innovation should happen in rural communities where the minerals are getting pulled out. And some of this processing will happen, like you said, Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, which is an urban setting, but some of that can happen in a rural setting because the land is cheaper, you're closer to the to electric sources, or you can, island your own power if that's the only way around the grid or what have you. So what do you think about opportunities for rural innovation in all of this?
Oh, I think absolutely, right. And this is the key with having such a wide variety of minerals and such a wide landscape of where they're located, because now we can start to, in lithium brine, again, going back to the start of BMAC and how we started was by this group of lithium brine developers. And so it's a common material. There's a common, focus on technology and how to get the lithium out of that brine. And so these are great, opportunities, bringing together innovation, technology. That can happen anywhere. That doesn't need to happen, in a major urban center or anything like that. So very much that's what's driving forward that industry right now, is kind of this rural and entrepreneurial spirit that I think is big in the West.
Nice. So your cluster work is almost done. I know Saskatchewan, we're lagging behind, and as of April 2025, you're going to help us out. But when Saskatchewan's done and all the other provinces are done and you've done your cluster work, what's next for BMAC?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Saskatchewan, the key is, adding these pieces. So end of the month, we add Saskatchewan in. I hope that we keep moving east, to tell you the truth, and Manitoba as well. And really then even on into Ontario and Quebec and further to the Atlantic, because this can be a broad ecosystem. And as we talked about, provincial trade barriers and breaking those down, like, how can we maximize it? So even if there is an ecosystem in the West, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't interact with the East. So I think we need to continue this. And like we talked about, projects take a while to get off the ground and to get up to commercial level. So what are the interim steps? And are there things we can be learning in the East that we need to transfer into the West and things like that? So as much as we've kind of completed the first stage of the project, I think there's still a lot more to go to really build out the ecosystems. And that's going to be our focus now. It's on that push to educate people, whether it's in the industry, government, folks in academia as well, getting them in and integrated with the industry and our investors. So letting them see the bigger picture. So now it's a bit of a promotion as well and trying to get that information out there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So before we end it, is there anything that you would like to say or bring up or in the subject?
Yeah, I think this has been a good conversation. Talk about a lot of the opportunities there. The big thing for me is we've got a limited time, right? This is very, very, time is of the essence for us to capitalize on this. And if we want to make the most of it, we've got to start coming together as industry, government, academia, like all communities. Make sure that we're taking advantage of these opportunities and building them out, because if we don't, we're really going to lose it. And that's what worries me. So I've been trying to make a push to get industry involved, industry beyond our membership as well, right? We've got to get everybody out there and pulling in the same direction, because I think that's the only way that we're really going to make the most of this.
And a good point, really good point. I think that we're behind. And we're so far behind that you see, again, we'll bring up China. They're the world's largest manufacturer of cars now. They're in Australia, they're in South America, just killing it. And so the North American automotive industry, we had to slap on 100% tariff. And the reality is we did that because we knew if they came in here, their technology is so far beyond us. They have EVs that are cheaper than gas cars, that can charge in 15 minutes, 5 minutes, that actually do better. Some of the batteries, the sodium batteries, do better in the cold. So when it's minus 40, it's actually doing better. So we're so far behind it. And I guess in April 2025, as we look at this trade war, China slapped a tariff on our canola exports because of the EV, right? So we're tit for tat right now. And now I'm hearing people in Canada saying we should drop that 100% tariff so that the farmers can sell canola, which I get where they're coming from, but that now means we have Chinese EVs. So just to be blunt, politically, like even if you don't agree with where your conversation with me today, that you don't believe in electric vehicles and you don't believe in this and that, I get it. That's fine. But what I just said is we're having to decide right now, because we put ourselves in this horrible place, being so far behind in technology. It's either we support Trump or we support communism. And I know that sounds like all big, but stop and think about it. That's what we just did. And that's because we're so far behind in this technology. So what do you think? Did I go too far with my statement, or?
No, I mean, this is, and I've heard the concerns of, the tariffs and the tit for tat, and that, and it is a tough situation, because you're right. We put 100% tariffs on EVs because they've got overcapacity in China. They're ready to ship them to Canada and North America now, and they could flood the market, right? And so that is a concern. It kills our auto industry. And what we did is side with the US and say, yeah, we want to protect the industry. We're going to put tariffs on. And unfortunately, the bottom fell out of that as well. So I think we have a very short period of time to figure out, is the US going to actually be serious and build out an automotive industry? And one that's going to work, because, it's interesting, Peter Navarro, the kind of tariff expert specialist on the Trump administration, he had an interesting opinion piece where he was talking about bringing back all the engines and the transmissions to the US to being built there. And I thought, you're years behind, 20 years behind. Why are you trying to bring engines and transmissions? You should be talking about batteries and magnets and motors. Like, that's exactly the problem. So if the US is really going to build out internal combustion engine vehicle market again, I don't think we really want to be part of that. So the next thing we need to do is say, nobody's going to buy it, and there's no market. So what we have to look at is perhaps the Chinese as an option, but not just importing the vehicles and saying, here's the infrastructure we have, bringing in a BYD and saying, is there an opportunity? Can we produce in Canada? How can we, with our parts suppliers feed into those vehicles? Because we have a very strong, very innovative industry. It's just got to have that end piece as well. So it's going to be interesting times. I think we're going to have to make a decision quite quickly so we can innovate and continue to grow.
Yeah, and to those who are right now driving an F-250, 150, whatever, screaming at this conversation right now, saying, "You just said who's going to buy it? I'm not going to buy it." Well, I'll just validate what I just said. Is BYD and CATL? They are killing it worldwide. China is now the largest exporter of automobiles, and they're taking over the market. So these internal combustion engines, we're not talking politics here. We're just talking about, we're looking at the market. There's 17 to 25% increase of EV sales across Canada or across the world year over year. So if other people in other markets want a cheap EV, we have to sell them that. If you want to personally drive a 150, go for it. I'm not going to try to convert you. We're just trying to say that if we keep building just internal combustion engines here in North America, the only market will be North America, which is what combined two countries, 390, 400 million. And what's the population of the world? 5-6 billion right now. So which market do you want to play in? It's not politics. We're just talking business. So you don't have to scream at us. That's what we're coming from. Anyways,
no, absolutely. All the other markets are moving that way. So it's the way of the future for sure.
100%. So if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way? Whether they're in the industry, they're running a mine, they're a junior, or they're just someone doing processing, how do they reach out to you?
What I would say first is check out our website, bmacanada.org. Lots of information on there. We have some industry ecosystem maps they can check out to see what's in the industry, who's operating there. So very useful information. But definitely contact me, Sean at BMA, that's SEAN, at bmacanada.org. And happy to talk to folks and let them know what we're doing and where they might fit as part of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.